China and Russia were both a large country, isolated, and much weaker than they looked. And nobody else really wanted to deal with them. The Chinese, for example, had no allies except for Pakistan. So they thought together they would have weight. Now, did the Chinese know from the Russians that they were planning to attack Ukraine? That's very much a question. I don't know the answer to that. But after it happened, and after it turned out the Russians were doing badly, the Chinese started to reach out to the Americans. And the Americans were having none of it. So we are in a situation right now where the whole geopolitical map of Eurasia is shifting. Well, there is the commonality of this. The Cold War was not simply in Europe. It was also in Asia. Vietnam, of course, Korea, of course, the Seventh Fleet dealing with the Chinese. That model is returning, but with fundamental differences. Russia is much weaker, and that's much less frightening. The Chinese, who appeared to be this fantastic economic power, have serious economic problems. And the United States has turned out to be much more powerful than even its friends thought. Well, it helped that the people we were dealing with are much weaker than was generally thought. China was thought to be an enormous superpower that could drive us out of the Pacific. The fact that they never drove us out of the Pacific didn't get anybody. Russia was supposed to be this new power that was going to go back into Western Europe. Well, they didn't do it. It was not simply an underestimation of the United States. It was a massive overestimation, particularly of China, but also Russia. There's a general understanding after Ukraine that their read of power in the world may have been off. And so in an extraordinary meeting, most of Asia came to a meeting about economics. But the most radical thing that happened, Japan, that has a constitution that says you can't fight a war. It said it would join the United States in defending Taiwan. This resulted in Chinese and Russian aircraft buzzing Japan. But we've now seen the third largest economy in the world, Japan, suddenly accepting the idea that it's part of the American coalition, along with a mass of other countries. Yeah, everybody's looking at the world and saying, I was betting on the wrong guy. I'm going to bet in the United States, and I'll take some risks too. What they're recognizing is that Russia was not a proto-liberal democracy slowly developing in that direction. That Russia was Russia. Its fears were fears that it had to deal with. And what happened in the first phase of the war is that the Europeans clustered around the United States and took the leadership, including Germany, which was the outlier. So the NATO came together as it was meant to and posed a real threat. So what we've seen now is the war is going on for a while. Everybody's hoping it'll end soon. And some of the European countries are getting a little antsy about this war. So they're looking for some sort of ceasefire, some sort of solution. And that's hard to find. Not yet, but it's recognizing a couple of things. First, that it can't simply depend on the United States. It has to be an ally of the United States. It has a substantial military. It's the third largest economy, and it doesn't have China's internal problems. China's economy has problems right now. Cities are being shut down and everything. So Japan is much more stable. Historically, Japan has been the dominant power in Asia. And I think it's returning to that role, but in a different relation with the United States. Well, what's changed is Chinese economy. The world still regards it as this massive economy. The economy is failing. The real estate industry which is their core, is collapsing. And they're desperately looking for foreign investment. They're looking in the United States for foreign investment. Right now, we're not going to give it. They're looking at the Japanese. So this is a country that has turned from Bubba, as my kids would say, has turned into the beggar. And it's much weaker than it looks like. And the global media has not quite caught up on it. It has. It is the power that is facing Ukraine. It is a power that has the closest relationship with the United States. And Germany, we have to remember, recovered from World War II because of the U.S. basing of troops there. Money poured into Germany. That money is pouring now into Poland. It's far from an economic power, but it's certainly one of the most vibrant countries in Europe and fearless. Unlike the rest of Europe, that's quite careful, cautious. The Poles are saying, let us in, we'll go. Well, right now, I think the European Union would be terrified if Poland was not part of the European Union. It has shown itself to be so aggressive, so self-confident, so capable, that Germany would not feel very comfortable with a non-EU Poland sitting on its eastern border. What he wanted, he achieved. He brought the Muslims into the coalition with the secularists. Remember, when he came to power, there's a rise of radical Islam. He recognized that this would tear the country apart. He solved the problem. He doesn't have plan B. So what's going to happen here is a new generation will take over. And just remember, when we talk about Belt and Road Initiative, that's Turkey. Turkey is the Belt and Road Initiative and is always wealthy. They were angry about it more for pride than for need. But right now, I don't think they want to be part of the EU with its regulations and rules. They are going to be redefining themselves now in the next decade. And becoming part of the EU means a kind of prison of what you can do and what you can't do. They want to be the link between Asia and Europe, which they historically were, going back centuries. And that is a very profitable place to be. And so I think they want to be between the two. And as for, China, well, China wants to get to Europe too. Best route is through Turkey. You have that, right? And plus, they survived the Holocaust. They came back, then the Russians wanted to get them. So they escaped to Vienna, and Vienna was divided into 4 zones at the time, like Berlin was. And they certainly looked for the American zone and found it. Well, I mean, I don't remember it as a small child. I was back in Vienna several times, and it's unchanging. It grows a little, it contracts a little, but basically it is what it is. And it is an underpopulated city. It could be a great city, but they don't want it. They want to retain Vienna as it is. It's cautious and it's frightened. It's very close to Hungary, and Hungary is taking a position that is essentially pro-Russian, the only European state that did. It shares a border with them, and whereas in meetings with Hungarian and Austrians, the Austrians have been very polite to the Hungarians, not that they like the Hungarians much, but because they don't want to get embroiled in this war. They've been through World War II, and they still remember it. They don't want to be involved. No, they're talking about it, and they're not very hesitant. I mean, most of the Eastern Bloc countries, like Romania, were deeply committed to the fight. The problem is everybody's trying to figure out how does this end. And the conversation is, and I've tried to say, and this is a war between 2 large countries. These wars take years. You've only been in it for 3 months, and you're already trying to find a solution. Well, it might come, but it may take a lot longer than you think. Europe as a whole is stunned by how wrong it was about Russia. The invasion of Ukraine, the manner in which the Russians behaved, reminds them of the fears of the Cold War. And the Germans in particular both want to do business. They want the fuel, the gas and everything else. But at the same time, they're looking at it and saying, well, the way we feared them in the Cold War is the way they are. They haven't changed, except for this. They're doing much more badly than we thought they would. The United States is an enormously powerful position. It is the leader. It is the leader of the European bloc, leader of Ukraine. But the United States is also very cautious. The United States understands that it could be drawn very deeply into a war with the Russians and painful. And it's been very careful not to send its own forces into battle. Ukrainian forces had to fight, were willing to fight, and the U.S. provided tremendous weaponry for them to fight the Russians to standstill, but we do not intend to put our own forces into the battle. For that sort of ceasefire to happen, the Ukrainians would have to accept that they lost the war to the extent that some part of the Ukraine would not be under their control. They don't think they have to do that because they think they're winning. The Russians, on the other hand, don't think they can afford to do that, or at least Putin doesn't afford to do that. So the really important question here is, there's been a lot of discussion, does Putin survive this or not? If Putin survives, he will continue fighting. But if he falls, I think the Russians very rapidly are going to find a withdrawal in their best interests.